Welcome to the deep dive. We take complex stories and really try to pull out the insights you need.
Yeah, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. And
Ah.
today, we're tackling something huge, Operation Midnight Hammer.
A really significant event, definitely.
You've got a whole stack of sources you sent over detailing these joint U.S.-Israel strikes against Iran.
Right. Lots to unpack there.
So our mission today is basically to break down the history leading up to this, get into the specifics of the operation, and then look at the reactions, both in the U.S. and around the world.
Geopolitics, legal stuff, the long-term view.
Yeah, all of it. We want to give you a clear, concise understanding of what feels like a real turning point.
It's your essential guide, really, helping you grasp the players, why they acted, and what this might mean down the road.
Because this conflict, it has deep roots, and the consequences could be huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So where should we start? The history.
let's do it. Dive in.
Okay, so this Iran-Israel conflict, it's not new. Definitely has those deep historical roots we mentioned.
Goes way back.
Yeah, but things really escalated after the Islamic Revolution in Iran back in '79.
Right, that changed everything.
It did. Iran became this theocratic regime, openly hostile to Israel. That set the stage for decades of tension.
You've traced that history. But when did the nuclear program become, the main focus, the big flashpoint?
Well, the focus did shift there, absolutely. But something often overlooked is how Iran, after the revolution, started using proxies, groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon.
The indirect approach.
Exactly. It fundamentally changed how conflict worked in the region. Tehran could project power without a direct state-on-state fight. And that strategy, it still makes conventional deterrence pretty tricky.
So that's the backdrop.
And then more recently, you have intelligence reports suggesting Iran's nuclear facilities were becoming a more direct threat. That really set off alarms not just in Israel, but in the U.S., Europe, too.
So it's a combination, the nuclear potential plus this long-standing strategy of using proxies.
Precisely. And look, Israel has hit Iran's program before, targeted airstrikes, things like that.
Right, this wasn't the absolute first time.
No, but the context is different now. Past sanctions on Iran, mixed results,
Yeah.
and the JCPOA, the big nuclear deal.
The one meant to trade sanctions relief for nuclear curbs,
Yeah, that one. Hopes were high for a diplomatic fix, but ultimately those talks broke down.
which left fewer options on the table.
Exactly. That breakdown, plus some really aggressive rhetoric from both sides,
Yeah.
it really paved the way for something like Operation Midnight Hammer.
Okay, so with that long history, it really does sound like this operation wasn't just another incident. It feels genuinely pivotal. So let's get into the operation itself. What actually happened?
Right. This was a major undertaking, highly coordinated, the U.S. working closely with Israel.
And the targets, directly related to the nuclear program.
Absolutely. They went after critical components, and the tech used was top tier. B-2 stealth bombers, Tomahawk cruise missiles.
Stealth tech, chosen for a reason, I assume.
Definitely. Chosen specifically for their ability to get through heavy air defenses, and, importantly, to minimize risk to the pilots and crews launching them.
Reading through the sources, it seems the strikes were incredibly precise. Can you walk us through which facilities were hit and why those specific ones?
Sure, the targets were very strategic. Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan.
Okay, let's take Fordo first. What's significant there?
Fordo is key because it's built deep underground, really fortified.
Right, hard to reach.
And it's crucial for enriching uranium to higher grades, the kind you'd need for a weapon. So hitting Fordo, especially given how protected it is, that wasn't just about stopping enrichment for a bit.
It was sending a message.
Exactly, a clear signal. Even your most secure sites aren't safe. It forces Tehran to rethink the invulnerability of its critical spots.
And Natanz. That's another big name we hear a lot.
Natanz is known for having lots of centrifuges, so hitting it degrades their enrichment capacity, in the immediate term, but it's also a strong political signal.
Okay. And Isfahan, what role does that play?
Isfahan is more about the nuclear supply chain. Research, technology development happens there.
So destroying infrastructure there slows down their future progress.
Right. Essential for inhibiting Iran's advancements down the line. It really does seem like a calculated plan.
It sounds very calculated. But with precision strikes like these, there's always the risk of things spinning out of control, right? What do the sources say about potential escalation or unintended consequences?
Well, the strategy itself seems aimed at delaying Iran's nuclear timeline through this preemptive action. But they were also clearly thinking about the international fallout, the potential for escalation.
Trying to thread a needle, maybe?
You could say that. This joint U.S.-Israel effort, it shows a united front against what they see as the threat from Iran's nuclear program. The calculated risk seems to have been that the precision would actually minimize immediate, large-scale escalation rather than provoke it.
Okay. So the strikes happen. The immediate question shifts to the reaction.
Oh.
What was the political fallout back home in the U.S.?
Well, President Trump immediately framed it as spectacular military success. A decisive response protecting U.S. interests and allies.
That's one perspective. But it wasn't unanimous, was it?
Not at all. Opposition popped up pretty quickly, and interestingly, from both Democrats and Republicans.
Bipartisan concern, what were they worried about specifically?
The main issue raised was constitutional. Did the president actually have the authority from Congress to order these strikes?
Ah, the authorization for use of military force question.
Exactly. It highlighted this ongoing debate in U.S. foreign policy about presidential power versus congressional oversight. It definitely raises questions about the precedent this kind of unilateral action sets.
And connecting that to the public, where do Americans stand?
That's crucial. Polls generally show Americans are pretty tired of foreign conflicts. There's a significant chunk of the population favoring diplomatic solutions over military ones.
The forever war fatigue.
Absolutely. That sentiment is deeply ingrained now.
Yeah.
And decision makers, well, they can't really ignore it anymore.
Okay, beyond the domestic politics, this obviously has huge international legal dimensions. How did the global community react on that front?
Yeah, this is where it gets really complex. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was quite forceful in his disapproval.
What was his main argument?
He essentially said the strikes went against established international law. The core issue is state sovereignty and the general prohibition against using force without UN Security Council backing.
That's Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, right? The bedrock principle.
That's the one. It forbids using force against another state's sovereignty unless the Security Council explicitly authorizes it. And that authorization was missing for Operation Midnight Hammer.
Which makes its legal standing tricky, to say the least.
Very tricky. And the big concern is what this does long term. How might an operation like this erode those global rules?
The structure's designed to prevent conflict.
Right. If nations increasingly act unilaterally, it raises serious questions about precedent. Does it weaken the frameworks we have for managing international disputes and holding actors accountable? It's a huge legal challenge.
So, legal debates aside, what about just the straight diplomatic reactions? Who lined up where?
Reactions came fast, and they were all over the map. Russia, for instance, being a longtime ally of Iran.
Predictably condemned it.
Yes, condemned the strikes, called them provocative, a threat to regional stability. The Kremlin urged restraint, warned about relations getting worse. Some experts even speculated Russia might increase military aid to Iran in response.
Okay, what about the European Union? They often try to mediate.
The EU expressed similar worries, called for immediate de-escalation, urged everyone back to the table to talk about Iran's nuclear program again.
Still committed to the JCPOA framework, essentially.
They reiterated their commitment to it, yeah.
Yeah.
Pushing for negotiations. It reflects this broader European concern that military strikes don't just affect Iran, they risk destabilizing the whole region.
It's like that high-stakes game you said Jenga earlier. One wrong move.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like that sometimes. Trying to keep everything balanced on this very shaky structure, one wrong pull and the whole thing could tumble down.
An intriguing analogy. Okay, let's flip to the other side.
Hmm.
What was the reaction from Iran itself and other key players in the Middle East?
Iran's government was quick to respond. Their narrative was that the damage was superficial and reversible.
Downplaying it.
It seems so. And according to the sources, this wasn't just about saving face domestically or projecting strength. It's seen as a strategic move.
How so?
By framing it as minor, it gives them diplomatic wiggle room. They can plan a measured response without looking weak or being forced into immediate, large-scale retaliation.
So they did threaten retaliation, but maybe not all-out war. What was the tone?
Their military leaders talked about a response that would be strategic, measured, aimed at addressing the threat, but trying to avoid a full-blown conflict. It's a very complex calculation for them, balancing looking strong with the dangers of escalation.
Makes sense. And neighbors. Countries like Saudi Arabia. How did they react?
Saudi Arabia basically called for stability and security in the region,
Hmm.
expressed concern about the potential fallout. They're trying to maintain a kind of balance in their own complex relationship with Iran.
And Lebanon. Always caught in the middle, it seems.
Lebanon, yeah.
Yeah.
Through various political groups there, you heard similar calls for peace, emphasizing the need to avoid anything that could destabilize things further. It really shows the shifting alliances and the constant struggle for influence across the Middle East.
Okay, we've talked states, but non-state actors are hugely important in this region. Groups like Hezbollah, Hamas. What was their take on Operation Midnight Hammer?
They came out strongly against it. Groups like Hezbollah and Hamas condemned the strikes, painting them as, blatant Western aggression.
So rhetoric, but does it go beyond that? Does it signal a change in their stance?
It could. By declaring solidarity with Iran, they're positioning themselves as defenders against Western intervention. It potentially signals a shift in how militant groups in the region might operate or coordinate.
What about Hezbollah specifically? They have significant military power. What are the implications there?
Hezbollah, based in Lebanon, basically doubled down on opposing Israeli and U.S. policies. They called the strikes an escalation that could destabilize an already fragile region.
And did they suggest action?
They expressed willingness to increase military support for Iran, essentially positioning themselves as a key ally in this. That definitely could raise tensions further and complicate diplomacy, adding another layer to the conflict.
And Hamas. Similar message.
Hamas also issues statements showing solidarity with Tehran, framed the strikes as an attack on all Muslim nations. Their leadership called for more resistance against Western powers.
How might that translate on the ground?
It could influence their own strategies, maybe leading to more coordination with other militant groups against shared adversaries. Their responses might push towards a more unified front against perceived threats, which again makes diplomatic solutions even harder.
This operation has clearly hit a nerve, not just with governments, but with ordinary people too, both in the U.S. and elsewhere. What's the general feeling out there?
In the U.S., reactions are pretty split, polarized. It reflects those deep divisions we already have about military intervention.
So some people support the strikes.
Definitely. Some see it as a necessary move to counter Iranian aggression, protect allies, safeguard stability. Especially with the fears about nuclear proliferation, you see major media outlets echoing this view, stressing strategic necessity, a show of strength.
But there's the other side too. Significant opposition.
Absolutely. Lots of advocacy groups, public figures, expressing real concern about escalation, worries about triggering a wider conflict.
What's their core argument?
Critics argue that military strikes just make things worse. They provoke Iran to retaliate. They risk dragging the U.S. deeper into Middle East conflicts. You hear prominent voices calling for diplomacy instead, urging a rethink of military strategies.
Learning from the past, basically.
Yeah, they emphasize the lessons from past interventions, the human costs, the financial costs of these long entanglements.
Okay, so putting it all together, what does this mean for the future? Long-term implications of Operation Midnight Hammer for U.S.-Iran relations, for Israel's security, for the whole region.
It really does feel like a critical moment that this operation, this level of U.S.-Israel military collaboration, it could seriously reshape the geopolitical map, creates new challenges, maybe new opportunities for diplomacy down the line, but it's uncertain.
And the nuclear deal aspect. How does this affect talks around Iran's program?
That's a key concern. Will this increased military pressure make Iran less likely to negotiate? Will they dig in their heels, seeing this as proof of hostile intent? It could definitely harm the prospects for diplomatic progress, potentially locking us into a cycle of action and reaction.
And for Israeli security, does hitting these facilities provide a lasting fix, or does it create new problems?
Well, the immediate military goals might have been met delaying the program, but long-term, it could lead to more instability. Iran might respond by boosting its own military, strengthening ties with its allies, including those non-state actors we talked about.
Making the security environment even more volatile for Israel.
Potentially, yes, complicating their whole deterrence strategy.
And the ripple effect across the wider region. Could this push other countries to change their stances or alliances?
The impact on regional stability is huge. Can't really overstate it. This kind of action could definitely be a catalyst. Other nations in the region might look at this and decide they need to rethink their own defense policies, their alliances.
Leading to shifts in power dynamics.
It could. Countries allied with the U.S. might find themselves in a tricky position, needing to redefine where they stand as tensions rise. It could deepen existing divisions. And you also risk external powers getting more directly involved, which increases the chances of a much bigger multi-sided confrontation, a real realignment of power in the Middle East.
Wow. Okay. So we've really gone through the layers of Operation Midnight Hammer today,
Yeah.
from the deep historical context to the specific military actions and this really wide range of reactions: domestic, international, legal, diplomatic.
Yeah, often conflicting reactions too. It shows that this isn't just about a military strike. It's an event that sent shockwaves through alliances, legal norms, diplomatic channels.
It truly has.
So the big question this leaves us with, perhaps for you listening, is what does this specific moment tell us about that really fine line? The balance between using preemptive military force and trying to find diplomatic solutions, especially for threats like nuclear proliferation.
The tension is always there.
Always. And as we see nations and even non-state groups rethinking their roles and strategies because of this, how might this single operation end up reshaping the entire architecture of security, both globally and particularly in the Middle East, moving forward?
It really makes you think about the profound, long-lasting impact these kinds of decisive moments can have on where international relations go next. Lots to ponder.